What is up, everybody? I'm Scott Melker, and you're listening to the Wolf of Wall Street's podcast, where 2 times every single week, we talk to your favorite personalities in Bitcoin, art, music, politics, finance, sports, basically anyone with a good story to tell. This show is powered by Blockworks Group, a media company with over 20 podcasts in their network, and you can check them out at blockworksgroup.io. If you like the podcast and you follow me on Twitter, you need to check out my website, join my newsletter, where I share all my trades, charts, analysis, markets, thoughts, and lessons on improving your trading and investing. You can check all that out at thewolfofallstreets.io. Now, today's guest is the author of a renowned book titled The Price of Tomorrow: Why Deflation is Key to an Abundant Future. Coming from a tech and entrepreneurial background, Jeff has noticed concerning trends in the economy that he believes to be both unsustainable and at odds with one another. I'm excited to learn more about his plans for the future of monetary policy, or at least what those plans should be if he was in control of the central bank. Jeff Booth, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
So as I touched on in the intro, you have a tech background, bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. Can you tell us about what you've done in the past and some of the technologies that you've worked on and are interested in?
The technology that I've worked on are pretty broad. I started a company in 1999, a tech company called Build Direct, and grew that to about $500 million, maybe just over that in US and market cap. And then been on boards and helped entrepreneurs and quite a number of different technology companies. So I've been at the front seat of where technology is kind of eating the world for a long time, and in that, just watched how fast things have been moving on technology. So I'll just kind of preface this with, it's incredible what's happening in technology. There's still crazy opportunities for entrepreneurs in technology. It's just, if I said, that's not sustainable with the way the world is wired from a monetary policy.
Can you explain a bit more deeply what you mean by that?
So technology is inherently deflationary. And when I say deflationary, it's deflationary on an exponential path. And technology removes labor, right? No single company, all the CEOs I would work with are trying to make the world a better place by using technology to reduce price, right? But that comes at a cost to labor. Labor is removed and technology is moving, and that brings prices down. And that's a good thing for society. It's a very good thing for society. In fact, every single monopoly around technology is created around you getting things for less, right? If you look at Google, you use it because it's free. If you look at Waze, you use it because it's free. If you look at Amazon, you use it because prices keep coming down, and then they add movies for free. If you look at your iPhone, everything on it is effectively free, right? And so, and by the way, those free prices or those free things are with monetary policy as it exists today, right? So they should be way cheaper. So your iPhone should be way cheaper, but they're propped up against unnaturally printing of money. So the natural course through history, through technology, is deflation. That's nature, right? That's what should be happening, and it should be happening everywhere at an exponent. So if technology is riding the rails of exponential trends, we should be getting exponentially more for less along that same trend line. So it begs the question, why aren't we? And because technology is up against today a force that is almost equal in power until it's not, but monetary easing, or debt creation and then monetary easing that is stopping prices from falling or as fast as they can, or that inflation pegged by central banks, that they need 2% inflation, otherwise the world collapses. And they're doing more and more bags of tricks to try to achieve that. It's actually causing the whole thing to accelerate faster. So we can go into that a little bit if you want, but that's what's happening.
Sure. I think this begs the question for anyone who might not understand it or have the background in it, because it's not something I think that your average person thinks about. What is their money, really, right? I mean, we're talking about monetary policy. We're talking about these sort of higher level concepts. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to what our money is and what purpose it serves, right? So maybe you can give a little background on monetary policy and how we got to this sort of debt-based inflationary environment?
Well, so maybe I'll start with inflation and deflation, because we grew up thinking inflation's bad, right? And so let's just look at those two concepts and say it's not good or bad. It's good or bad for different people or different policies.
Right,
so
in a vacuum.
Exactly. So inflation, all it is when your money is worth less and goods and services, essentially goods and services go up in relation to your money.
Right.
So if you want to know what money is, it's just a store of value that through time that you can buy more goods and services or less goods and services. With inflation, you can buy less goods and services because that store of value on inflation is less, right? So deflation is the opposite. Deflation is your goods and you can buy more with your money as prices come down. So if you were just you and I, we're having a conversation in our lives and we've said, oh, wow, wouldn't inflation be good because we could get more and more for less? Like that would be natural.
Seems pretty obvious. Yeah.
So why do you think why do you think you go and look for deals? Why do you think you gravitate as people to companies that are offering you more and more for less? It's natural. That's what we should be doing, right? And that's how capitalism works. When entrepreneurs race into a system to create better value, they win, right? And so that's the natural course. So now on those two different pieces, inflation, you could say, is a hidden tax to society, right? So governments can't pay for all their services without hiding some of the taxes in inflation,
right?
And so what they do is they inflate away their currencies, because otherwise taxes would have to go way up to cover their services, right? But inflation actually is a hidden tax on most of society, right? So it enriches some, because if you have the assets and you drive inflation, right, those assets go up in price. And you pay back the debt on on your borrowing with cheaper money tomorrow because of the inflation. On deflation, it's the exact opposite argument. Your currency value goes up, and you buy goods and services for less. So now, where are we in this transition, right? So one of the things I pointed out to in my book, and it's predicted all of these events, right? It didn't predict COVID, but it just predicted everything else in the acceleration, is if you looked at the natural thing into what's happening with technology, you would assume prices are coming down way more than they are right now everywhere, right? That's what would be natural. So it begs the question, what has happened to stop that, and why isn't that happening? And pre-COVID, we had $250 trillion of global debt against an $80 trillion global economy. That was pre-COVID.
Right.
And 185 trillion of that new debt was created over the last 20 years.
Right.
Right. So that leverage, that debt, isn't driving the same effect to economies. So if it's not, debt isn't good or bad. It's debt that can't be paid back is really bad, right? So if you have to create essentially $4 of new debt for every dollar of growth, and it gets worse and worse and worse, everybody realizes that you can't pay back that debt.
Of course.
Right? And so that's when what's happening today is the rules are changing to not pay back the debt, right? To solve debt problems with more debt, right?
Right.
To try to create inflation at any cost, because central banks missed that this was a structural change to society, that deflation could be a really good thing. And they went all in on creating more and more debt leverage. And now they're trying to solve that same problem by creating more and more debt and leverage. Because if you allow deflation to happen now, you have a depression. Asset prices, if governments stopped doing what they're doing right now, and let's argue both sides of this.
Right. Please.
If governments stop doing right now, and you're seeing today in what's happening in the U.S. and as policy isn't allowing this next level of stimulus, you're seeing cracks in the market. That unwind without more stimulus, and actually without exponentially more stimulus, that unwind would take asset prices down by 80 or 90%.
Yeah,
across the board. Right. House prices. So a lot of people say, "Oh, housing is a great store of value," right? And it is against this deflationary. But they don't ask, what would my house be worth if in the last 20 years there wasn't $185 trillion of additional stimulus, right? They don't ask, what would prices look like if there was a normal policy, right, around. So you have a Ponzi scheme on one side, right, of more and more debt creation, money printing, and people can make a lot of money in Ponzi schemes if you're out at the right time, right? If you're in the right assets and everything, you can make money in a Ponzi scheme. But so you have on one side of this, if governments have two choices, central banks have two choices: depression, to clear this, and if they allow depression, you reset debts and everything else. You wipe out the debts, wiped out. You go through a multi-year depression, and banks fail. Right? It's so ugly for society that's because the problem is so big now. So So I suspect they're not gonna allow that. Right? I suspect that they're going to try everything to create inflation.
They've openly stated now that, 2% is no longer the goal, and they're going to, play the experiment of allowing it to rise beyond 2% and see what happens. So where it was sort of this hidden policy, as you touched on before, now it's kind of coming out in the open that, hey, we need inflation, and we're going to push it. Right.
Yeah, but now let's go a little deeper into that piece, because a lot of people, this debate rages and everything else, and say, when are we going to get inflation and deflation? When? And this is just so I can't predict exactly what policymakers will do. I can just say what the probabilities look like. And so, if central banks use kind of what the Fed does today, Powell could say all day long he's going to create inflation. He has no ability to right now.
Of course.
Because by pushing through bank, if banks won't lend to the economy, right, and there's not a good enough economy, and there's not a good enough economy because of the very thing that central banks are doing, right, then that will never get into the hands of enough people to create inflation. In fact, what they're doing is actually driving asset prices higher, because it gets into the banking system. It's a direct injection into companies like Facebook, Google, as a store of value. It's a direct injection into housing, real estate prices as a store of value, Bitcoin, gold, and very little of that is getting into the economy. Right? Because people know what's coming next. So they're putting it in stores of value. And let me go. So that's going to change. So that will change, but it hasn't changed yet. And it's not just the Fed, it's global. Right? Every country is doing the same thing.
Right.
So that is actually more disinflationary in principle. Because what ends up happening is, to pay that back, if you assume it has to be paid back, taxes must go up on all of these things that destroy the economy further. In fact, you're stopping the natural forces of capitalism from working, and entrepreneurial talent from a free market from existing, and you're putting all power in the government by doing that. So I'll give you an example. So real estate prices, we're on Zoom right now instead of meeting, right? And
yep.
And so are many companies. And I'll go a little deeper into it. A lot of main companies, especially technology companies, is saying work from home forever.
Yeah, this is it.
This is it. So, by the way, that's step one. Step two to that equation is, if you can work from home, and I'm a CEO of a company, wouldn't I hire the cheapest labor, the best talent, cheapest labor anywhere in the globe instead of just in the US?
Why pay New York City salaries to an employee in Bangladesh, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Isn't that more deflation, right?
Yes.
So think about what's happening. So in other words, way more jobs are coming out of society than anybody knows. Staggering amount. And we're making it happen faster and faster. So, but that also means that real estate prices are way too high, right? Because 50% of the real estate, if 50% of the people aren't in the real estate in the towers, then you'd think that the commercial real estate has to fall by that. And a lot of restaurants will close and a lot of everything else will close as a result of that. So but if that happened, then a lot of the commercial loans against that and the bond funds and everything else that hold their paper against that, including the banks, they also fail.
So 2008, 2009. I mean, it's a complete repeat of the same cycle. We've learned nothing.
Exactly. So what does the government do? They prop up those asset prices. And by doing what they're doing and by propping up the asset prices, they hold prices unnaturally high, right? And then there's a whole bunch of society that can't pay for those prices being high. The system entrepreneurs can't pay for that. They can't start businesses, everything else. Or in the real estate too, in residential real estate, those asset prices are high. And there's a whole bunch of society that cannot pay for the prices that you paid for, and their food and housing and medical care is going way up. And then
it's not like their salaries are rising, right?
Exactly.
I mean, they have either the same or less money, arguably, to pay for more expensive goods. So they're effectively priced out of everything.
Because the center is trying to create inflation, making their salaries worth less, and they live in a competitive environment of what we just talked about, where salaries
is less, right?
Where the companies are driving. So the salaries are going down or neutral as that competition comes in, or the companies are replacing that labor with technology.
Right.
So that's that. And then what would you do if you can't pay your bills and everything else, and you can't pay your food and housing and everything else, and it keeps going higher and higher? Wouldn't it be natural, if you were on the other side of that equation, that you would say, I need to vote a government in that gives me free money, right?
Of course.
So by distorting capitalism and the free market economy, you get socialism. And you get a rise of socialism, and this is predictable, an ebb and flow throughout history, like a clock ticking back and forth on a pendulum. This is a predictable consequence, and essentially all of those roads lead to the biggest thug being in power and changing rules. Right? So if you look at communists, if you look at Russia, if you look at China, if you look at Saudi Arabia and everything else, power is controlled, right? That's the path, by the way, on both political parties in the US. That's the path that we are on. Right? That's the path that just about it, because as you centralize
it's
power,
not party specific at all. I mean, it's the path, it's the very nature of the beast at this point.
Both parties have no ability to stop what's coming.
Right.
Zero. And they're both, and one party is saying, it's capitalism and everything else, and it's not capitalism. And the other party is a response to that. It's driving more socialism. Both parties have no idea what's going on underneath this that could provide abundance to society. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. That so the political discourse on both sides of this, and people moving into silos, yelling at each other, when it's a perfectly predictable consequence of monetary policy underneath on a structural change, it blows my mind.
It's funny because we have extremely rich people literally moving into silos. Yeah. I mean, you see them for sale, like literal missile silos, bunkers being sold all over the world to the wealthiest people for when the world completely melts down. Yeah,
and because if you just carry this forward, and that's what I talked about in the book a lot, and actually funny, COVID just accelerated everything I talked in the book. But
it was already there.
It was already there. But the next response and the one after that, this is really predictable throughout history. You see it all the time throughout history. So so I know this is a Bitcoin podcast, and I didn't talk specifically in my book about Bitcoin until the end. But that's actually what, because I wanted to understand this from a first principles basis. What are the options? Why are people making these decisions? What's likely to happen next? And then a response to that, what's likely to happen? And today, the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it provides, I would say, a life raft away from that, from what's happening. And that
you can opt out.
And that life raft I suspect, is going to be incredibly important. I am begging mine to get. I think it's completely irresponsible to not have some in your portfolio.
Thank you. I agree 100%. Even if it's 1%, 2%, 5%, the fact that could be the only thing you have left that's worth anything down the road makes it a worthwhile hedge, and that it's idiosyncratic and could, obviously has its own value and risk that's a different risk profile than every other asset basically that you can own.
I've said this on a couple other podcasts, but this is so if you look throughout history, right? Why don't people move from their country when they see this coming?
Because they don't see it coming.
Many do.
Normalcy bias, though, right?
I would actually argue that in Weimar Republic, with wheelbarrows full of money,
right? Yeah, how could you not at that point?
And even before that, and the rise of tensions, right? Before Hitler was elected, you could see the rise of tension. You could see the breaking of society. You could see it coming for a long time, right?
Right.
You can see it coming in the U.S. right now. You can see
for
it
a long time. Yeah.
For a long time. You can see it getting worse and worse. And these signposts that you're seeing are all connected to something else. People are looking at the signposts and saying, wow, can you believe that person did that? And it's getting worse, or that group of people did that. If you look back to what it's connected for, this is super easy to see what's going to happen next and after that. Really predictable throughout history. So why don't people move? And in the past, it's because all their wealth was concentrated in a country. Their real estate was concentrated in that country, real estate wealth. Their business wealth it was all denominated in that currency, and they couldn't move it. And so what they would do is they would buy a citadel, they try to, and everything else, and they try to get political power and everything else and be concentrated, and they couldn't get it. And getting out without the currency was like being a refugee in another
Absolutely.
country.
Yep.
And so they would long for the time that it'll change instead of getting worse and worse and worse.
Here we are.
And that's where we are right now, right? That we're there right now. And I suspect that on both political parties, they're not going to change. I wish they would. I wish we could have a real debate about the core principle instead of what's happening now, which is just a song and dance and media show. Because then really great minds could, how do we work to cause abundance and create a solution? But that doesn't seem to be happening. And so Bitcoin, if you just go where Bitcoin goes out of this, you can remember your passwords and move anywhere.
Yep.
Right? You can take your wealth with you wherever you go. And so it's a lifeboat to what's going to happen.
But it's interesting. You talked about why people don't leave their country, and the implication there is like, why don't wealthy people leave their country, right? Like, I've got all this money, it's coming. My net worth is going to be devalued. It's going to disappear. I need to move. Interestingly, with Bitcoin, that's an argument for the wealthy, but also for the poor, right? You see refugees at the border all the time, paying whatever they have left, their mom's ring, their dad's heirloom watch, and handing over their luggage and leaving, bribing the border officials to get across with nothing left. And if you have your seed phrases in your mind, that doesn't happen with Bitcoin. So It's really a solution at every single level, from the poorest to the wealthiest.
And you see that too, Bitcoin Black America.
I had him on the show. Yeah.
And so when you start to see different people, this could be the greatest wealth transfer the world has ever seen to the middle class and poor, like without revolution, to the middle class and poor, because they can make the same vote right now.
That vote being buy Bitcoin and opt out of the system.
Exactly, opt out of the system.
So you obviously teed it up earlier. We know what the problem is. We have seen the future in the past, right? I mean, this is a repeating cycle. It's no mystery as to what's likely to happen. So you obviously have ideas as to what the solution is.
Yeah, and I looked at all of the solutions. Now, I was very hopeful when I wrote the book. Now, remember, I wrote the book in beginning part of 2019, and I published it in early 2020, just before kind of this all happened. So when I wrote the book, I was hopeful that there could be policy, that it'd move policy and have a gradual unwind, and that you could save currencies. I no longer believe that can happen. I wish I did. But we've just made the problem exponentially worse, right? Governments have to. There's two choices: default on currency through default. Both are default. Depression, default on debt. Drive hyperinflation, default on currency. There's only two choices from here, and both those choices have profound consequences for how society looks today and a creation of new money, right? So, but if you look out past that, and if you look at what I talked about in the book, why are we fighting so hard against gravity, right? Why are we forcing concentration of wealth through crazy policy and leaving society out? Because the natural order of things through technology is why do you use technology? Because you save time, right? And your time is the most valuable thing in your life. And so technology, if you let natural forces happen, distribute that abundance through the technology game to society in general, a mass-driven society, you would have that abundance everywhere. People think economics is about value. Economics is about scarcity. And technology is opposite. It creates abundance. So as technology, it's going to remove the jobs anyways, right? And so as technology automates things, instead of thinking, I need to work more to pay for artificially rising prices that aren't natural, right? They're artificial, and I need to work longer and longer and harder to keep up with prices, and I need better paying jobs to do that, when we know that can't happen, right? And so you're going to drive a whole bunch of so you're going to concentrate wealth through that, and you're going to drive revolution through that. Why wouldn't you just, as the jobs came out, drive prices down lower and lower and lower, so we would free the most important thing that we have is a time. And if you look at hard money, if you look at everything else, it forces governments to allow the natural course, which technology would create abundance. Technology would create abundance for us all. It would look a lot more like Star Trek than it does Terminator.
Yeah,
and that's what would happen.
That's interesting. So does the answer that, I mean, but what happens to all these people when they start losing their jobs and technology takes over? We obviously have like the Yang, universal basic income concept, which is just send everybody helicopter money. But that could be further inflationary.
But let's go into that and just from a first principles basis. And I would love to have this debate with him, Kelton, anybody who believes that is, like, look through history. You can't create money. And so I don't, but I understand these aren't bad people. They're putting a socialism fix on their bigger government, more control of government fix on a problem that can't be solved there, because they do care about this same thing. They just have the wrong solution. And so it's not they're bad people. They're just stuck in a framework that says, and a whole bunch of people, it's easy to say, oh, wow, if I don't have to pay, well, I need more money. I'll take more money, without the consequence of, wait, I'm taking more money. I'm taking what the government says they're going to give me is a tiny little bit of what they artificially created the prices higher to give me, right? And it puts, so it's such a ludicrous.
RoundTheX.com is one of my favorite companies in the entire crypto space. What they do is take all your small purchases and round them up to the nearest dollar and invest that spare change into any of over 30 crypto assets of your choice. They integrate with your favorite exchanges so that you can view various exchange balances all in one dashboard and round up into different assets all at the same time, and they do all this without ever holding any of your Bitcoin. This is by far the best way to dollar cost average into Bitcoin. Go to roundthex.com and use the promo code WOLF for $4 in free Bitcoin after making your first roundup or purchase. That's ROUNDLYX.com and code WOLF for $4 in free Bitcoin. Diginex is making huge moves and is soon to be the first crypto exchange listed on the NASDAQ. This means that people will finally be able to invest on a platform they're comfortable with without being directly exposed to Bitcoin. Absolutely massive for mainstream adoption. Diginex has basically everything investors need under a single roof, including an institutional-grade exchange called Equus. Equus allows institutional and retail investors alike access to an exchange that's on par with platforms they've come to trust in other markets. This means they are compliant with regulation, transparent and fair with regards to fees and orders, secure and far ahead of the curve in regards to innovation. Go to equus.com/wolf to get 5% off trading fees. That's EQUOS.com/WOLF to get 5% off of your trading fees. Sign up now. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard about the DeFi craze in crypto. By far the safest and simplest way to passively earn in the space is to hold your coins on Celsius. You can earn your rewards in the same crypto you're holding, or you can earn even more in their Cell token. Right now, I choose to earn 5% on Ethereum in Ethereum and 15% on my stable coins in Cell token. It's a little bit better than the sub 1% interest rates you can earn in a legacy bank account. Celsius was founded with the belief that crypto is the opportunity to really shake up the financial system. They're changing the standards for all financial services. They share 80% of their revenue in the form of weekly reward payments. That's how their users are earning up to 15% APY with compounding rewards. They also commit to providing the lowest cost loans on the market. Their loans start at just 1% APR. For just 1% interest, you can borrow cash against your crypto and avoid selling, which also eliminates the taxable event. It's absolutely huge. High rewards on your holdings and low interest on loans on a platform whose mission you can believe in. Celsius is giving $20 to every new user that joins with promo code WOLF. Just enter the code in the app during registration. $20 is awarded after 30 days of maintaining a wallet balance of $200 or more. Visit celsius.network, that's CELSIUS.network, and use promo code WOLF, WOLF. Right, and to that end, we talk about, and we've talked about here, the idea that prices continue to rise, and that's inflation. But really, I mean, what people need to understand, that's not really what's happening. What's happening is your money's worth less, right? It's relative to your money. So like you can watch the rise of the stock market, but if you peg that against Bitcoin or gold instead of against the dollar, well, the stock market's not quite as impressive as it looks, right?
Right.
You could argue that stocks are rising is not really the case, but in reality, the dollar is dropping. Correct?
Yeah. So that's it. MMT, all of these proposals, just essentially centralize more power in government. And what created the problem, central banks and government, what created the problem, and we're going to have way more higher prices. We're going to create higher prices, and we're going to give you a little bit of that money to pay for the higher prices. And then the more you do that, the more you centralize. And when I said it looks like the biggest thug, right? You could hope in that case for enlightened leaders that you're going to give all your power to.
Not what happens.
It never what happens once you control a society, and it just never. History shows it never happens. So I'm happy to debate on a first principle. It's not bad people. In an environment, in a politicized environment like this, a lot of people will say those socialists, those communists, and everything else, and on the very other side, not realize that they're saying the same thing about how capitalism works today.
I mean, yeah, and it's not a political statement at all, because, like you said, you see it on both sides. But to derail it for the people in power, who are seeing stocks go up, and they're, wealthy, and they're being given bailouts, and their corporate bonds are being purchased by the government. And then those are the very same people who are criticizing socialism when it's just corporate socialism. So socialism, it's like
crony capitalism.
Those in power believe socialism only applies to poor people.
Totally.
Right? But rich people are the ones who are actually the benefactors of socialism in this country.
And here's one thing I would say. I am blown away that the amount of I've been blessed by what's happening on the book, right? This is getting into some major circles.
Good timing.
And so some of the stuff that's coming to me is staggering, from some of those same circles. But I'm blown away that way more of the billionaire class hasn't come in and said, this is because a bunch of that billionaire class is created actually out of the technology advancements that I'm talking about. Of course. And they have to know better, right? And they are actually the most at risk of if this system as the system fails, because if you keep driving it along this axis,
their money will be vapor. Yeah.
Not just their money. They'll be able to get out into Bitcoin and other stuff as well, but you won't be able to stop the march of pitchforks coming for them, right? That's how these things reset. And so if anybody should care a lot about this, it should be the wealthy that look over the fence and say, a society doesn't function well, doesn't function at all, unless you have equitable rules in that society.
I mean, like feudal lords and their castles. It's not very, it does, you can go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years and the example never changes. So presumably then we need to let technology advance and do its job and free up more time. But how does that affect the average person if they lose their job as a result? What's the answer for them?
So this is the hardest thing to comprehend, right? And there might need to be a transition, and whether it's UBI, whether it's something, there might need to be some sort of transition, right? To how do we allow society to make this transition? Because that transition could be abrupt and dislocation everywhere. Just imagine, just do a thought experiment and say Bitcoin wins today. It's $1 million a coin today.
Right. Global reserve currency, whatever. Right. The whole narrative. Yeah.
And say, can you imagine society in that?
Nobody would have it. And we'd be living Mad Max. It would literally be, yeah.
It would be so even though a bunch of Bitcoiners and everything else want this to go up really fast.
I talk about this all the time. Yeah.
We want this to go slower, and we want more people to have this. And we want governments to understand it, embrace it, and drive adoption to it.
I'd rather have half as much worth twice as much, for sure, with more people having exposure.
More people having exposure, and some of the structures that provide a good life underneath it, right? Because if it happened really fast now, it'd be just complete chaos.
It's the end of the world. It really would. Yeah.
So, but again, going back to your point on what if you just let it happen. So let's say the risk on the person today losing their job is they know prices are going up. That when I fall off this ladder, this crazy ladder, I drop to and I don't know, I can't feed my family. I can't do anything else. The risk on a deflationary path, it would fall, like imagine housing at 1/10 the value.
Yeah.
Imagine all of the things you buy today at 1/10 value, and things, and I use this example often, but the air you breathe is abundant. You can't price it. You get it for free. That's what technology creates everywhere. And it won't. Some things will still cost money as entrepreneurs race into those opportunities to drive them down, right? And more of society will get the technology will be like air, right? Yes, there will be pockets of opportunity. There's tons of opportunity in markets today. But if you let the natural forces, your flashlight app on your phone, you don't pay for. Your camera on your phone, you don't pay for. My guitar tuner, I don't pay for. And people think, oh, that's because Google or Apple subsidizes it. It's not. It's because the technology to write that code costs nothing. It distributes across the world for zero. And so more and more of those things, not just in technology, but technology is a base layer in everything else. More and more of those things are going to happen. And if we could let that happen, and we could share the abundance that comes from technology, and capitalism would work perfectly. Entrepreneurs seeking opportunities to provide better value, if they're right, would drive along that axis. Debt would work perfectly in that. Savings at first would be way more important. And then my savings, if I could get a return on my savings by betting on an entrepreneur and looking at, okay, you're doing this and it's going to deflate over time, but you can create a big business in doing that, I would invest in that entrepreneur just the same as I would today. It would work perfectly. Stopping that, I don't see another alternative.
You can't stop, yeah.
It won't be stopped, right? So you only warp society by trying to stop it, and we're really warping society.
So the idea being that technology frees up so much time and the price of goods drops so dramatically that you don't really need a high-paying job. If any, you could do something and be able to afford your life and live a better life with much lower prices and much more time on your hands.
Renaissance, art, a whole bunch of things frees up your time instead of being on a hamster wheel to try to save enough money to retire the last 10 years of your life in relative comfort before that money is destroyed. It just looks opposite. It's really hard to comprehend because we've been conditioned. Our brains grew up, so they're wired for this other world. So when I say this to some people, they go, no, because they go back to the way their brains are wired.
Right.
But it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what central bankers want. I wanted a red bike for Christmas when I was 7 and I didn't get it. They can't stop this from happening, right? They, in the long run, they can short term, they can change the rules. You can, instead of the central banks, they can make the treasury the de facto, and you could print helicopter money. You could drive hyperinflation. But long term, we are going to have a deflationary, because technology, a deflationary world, because technology is a bigger force than the abuse of money.
What's interesting is that, your average Bitcoiner, certainly like maximalist, has always had the dollar will hyperinflate. My Bitcoin will be worth something. That's the future, right? Dollar's going to hyperinflate. Dollar's going to hyperinflate. And it gives you this assumption that that's the fear of the Fed and the central banks, but they're much more scared of deflation than they are of inflation, correct?
Yeah, because
why is that if this is so superior?
Because
it's not for them.
but the entire system collapses. Banks collapse. If you said that, I don't want to say these are bad people, but the entire system under which they've built the temple on the hill collapses. Right. If they allow deflation, so it doesn't look good, right? These are two choices. And the probabilities are there. So it would be hard in a political environment like this for a central bank to retain authority to say we're going to let the natural clearing functions of capitalism, Schumpeter's law of creative destruction, happen, because there's consequences, because they didn't let it happen in 2008 and they didn't let it happen in 2000, and they've made the debt bubble the debt bubble of all bubbles. The consequences are so profound for the world. It'd be really hard to be on your watch and say, okay, we're going to let the banking system fail.
Which that means they're just kicking the can, right?
Well,
eventually it's popping. They just don't want to be the one who's standing there holding the bag when it does.
It's failure by a different route. That's what it is. It's again, this is failing no matter what. It's just
right. But the deflation, even if there was a seamless path to it, which we all know that there isn't, but if this abundant future, if you could lay out a direct path with not that much pain, they still wouldn't want it because it's the very thing that threatens the core of their power and the entire system as a whole, right?
Yeah, well,
deflation is the end of central banks. It's the end of it's the end of the wealthiest people. It's the end of this kleptocracy that we have and all the corporate socialism that we've talked about, because it really democratizes money and for the people.
Yeah, I would say
you don't want that.
Yeah, but if you look out through history and everything else, and you just I can argue all sides of this. Of
course, you have to.
But capitalism isn't perfect either. Like a free market, to say we're all equal, we're not all equal. We have very different skills, and in certain times in a capitalist world, like a total free market, those skills are valued by the market differently, right? And that creates, inequality. Left unchecked, capitalism also creates an inequality that concentrates wealth and power and everything else. So it's just, if you looked at a free market, because there's only two ways to organize labor and capital at this scale, right? Free market or socialism, and anything, and so those are the kind of two ends of the scale, and that free market, I do believe there needs to be checks and balances against pure capital free market, so that you could provide a transition for society to thrive, right?
Well, we don't have, nothing we have right now even is reminiscent of a free, like, people love to say that the United States is a free market, that capitalism thrives, but we have neither of those things, right? It
doesn't look anything like that. And then so all the roads lead to the biggest thug in power, right? Changing of laws to concentrate more power and more wealth. That's what's
the last society that we can point at, or any society on earth, that you would actually define as a free market?
Well, so if you think about what the U.S. looked like for a lot of, it looked like a free market. What produced the wealth and what produced the meaningful rise of the U.S., it looked like a free market.
We're talking about a long time ago.
Yeah, but what's happened, same thing as what's happening on the exponential curve of technology wanting to change this. What's happening is exponentially the debt and the monetization of the debt is making it worse and worse. So how it feels today is so far away that it felt from what it felt in the 70s, and it slowly got worse. And now it's getting worse at a scale that is hard to comprehend. But what drove a prospering middle class, what drove the highest innovation?
We don't have a middle class, right? Yeah.
But what drove that for generations is mosely a free market economy. Yes, there was going off the gold reserve changed that, and it happened slowly, and so it almost doesn't look. It's not. You can't even comprehend it today. Okay, you just talked about going off the gold standard, which I always find a very interesting conversation. So we obviously went to this debt-based fiat. What was the compulsion behind that decision? What motivated that? So, and I talk about this in the book too, but it's just game theory, right? Keynes would not be an advocate of what's happening today.
Clearly.
And so he proposed a Bancor on a unit instead of the U.S. dollar tied to gold, because he knew that if the U.S. currency was tied to gold, eventually they would go off the gold standard. And what they did is effectively they couldn't pay their bills, right? Taxes were really high at that time. I think they were 90%. Yeah,
90% for the wealthiest at some point. 92% it topped out or something. Yeah.
And they couldn't inflate away, and they couldn't take taxes up anymore. So they took their problem and they exported it to the world, right? And now that gave them control of a fiat currency that they could manipulate at will. And if you look at what happened it started slowly, right? And it just got progressively worse as you want to. Right? And every country's response to that is do the same thing. So now you have competitive devaluations of currencies all around. And how do you trade with somebody if you can't trust their currency? And so then you have trade tariffs coming in, and you have and all of it is a function of not having sound money. So
right. I mean, our government, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, our president has said he wants a weaker dollar to be able to compete.
And then China wants a weaker dollar too, and then Euro wants a weaker dollar too. So it's just a competitive value, and all of that's going into like, how do you trade? How do you trade? If you had your own economy and you didn't have to trade, you didn't have to buy raw materials from other countries or anything else that was completely self-contained. I don't know, maybe you could get away with it if you could trick your society for long enough. Maybe
one could argue that money, certainly the structure of money, was created in a world where you didn't really have to worry about the rest of the world. Right. I mean, these were national currencies pre-real globalism, before we had, multinational corporations all over the world, before we were trading at this level, before everything we used was being made in foreign countries and things like that. So maybe, as, I guess playing devil's advocate, these currencies could work if it was very insular and very within your own borders. Right. Yeah. I mean,
and again, history doesn't exactly repeat. It rhymes, but it doesn't repeat. We are living in, so what's happening today in technology? Just keep coming back to that. And I'd encourage your viewers to keep coming back to that. If they knew what's happening and how fast as AI is moving, if they knew it's borderless, it doesn't care, right? It doesn't, here's a crazy irony. I'm on with the House of Commons in Canada, their finance committee, all the politicians in Canada presenting what's happening and everything else. And we're using Zoom. And there isn't one job in Canada on Zoom. And they can't understand what's happening. And that mobility of labor to be able to create the best platforms is completely borderless. No government's going to stop it. Right?
Yeah.
And it's getting increasingly so over and over and over again. And it's going to move not just from what we're looking at now. If you saw some of the stuff that's on the radar, if you saw some of the stuff that I'm very involved in now, it's not widely distributed yet. People don't know about it yet. They just see glimpses. But if you saw some of the stuff that's coming, you just go, there is no possible way that net, there's way more jobs in the globe with what's coming. There's no possible way.
Yeah, I had very recently, I put out an episode with Humayun Sheikh, who's the CEO of Fetch AI, and he was, one of the leaders on global DeepMind, which sold to Google and everything. And he definitely got my wheels turning and put this in perspective for me, how much AI is machine learning, AI, these things are going to control everything. I mean, You're not, we were joking about me telling my daughter that she's never going to drive a car whenever she asks because she's 5. It's just the future is, I think it's clear that technology is the future and that, most of these things that humans are doing, we're not going to be doing.
And what ends up happening is we can have this conversation and then we can go back to saying, okay, well, how do I get the biggest, highest paying job in a world that looks like that? And if you just zoom up a level, that's what's happening all over the world, right? And we're forcing that to happen because of an inextricable, we have to have prices rising all the time. So that we have to have more jobs and we have to have higher paying jobs when it's actually not the order of things. It's not the natural order of things. It's the opposite to the natural order of things.
It really is. Yeah, it really is. So let's get into the solutions. We've talked about, for your average person, talking about the solutions for the government. Obviously, we've gone there, but Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin, right? That's one obvious solution. It's an obvious hedge, even if you can only buy a little. Your downside risk to buying a little is very low. Your upside potential is tremendous. What else can we do?
Yeah. So where I would place my bets right now, Raoul Pal said that he's irresponsibly long Bitcoin. I am too, right?
Yeah, me too.
But I would say so I would also have some in cash, even though that I know that the high likelihood is governments are going to destroy their currencies. If we have any misses in policy, and we go to a deflationary spiral, that cash will be worth having. So I would say, and US dollar, people think it's going to fail tomorrow. It's not going to fail tomorrow.
Not happening. It's the world's reserve currency.
Exactly.
By the way, when you say cash, do you mean literal cash in a bank or mattress, or do you trust your bank to be holding that cash for you? Because if the bank fails and there's a run on the bank, your cash is not, I mean, your cash right now that's in a bank is being lended and is not sitting in the bank anyways, right?
Yeah. So as I understand, the banks in Canada are way stronger as far as, but I would be, so it depends on what bank. And Canada wouldn't be strong if it wasn't. So, but I would be careful what bank but yes,
some actual cash on hand.
Because if it was depression and you could buy assets for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, of course. That's where the real wealth is created, right? The people who actually have cash during a depression, during a deflationary environment.
And then tech companies are a really good store of value against this because they're consolidating wealth faster as a result of this. Anyone who's listening to this, look up network effects, explore network effects. Network effects are 70% of the value of most technology companies, and they get stronger and stronger and stronger. Really hard to break. Actually, Bitcoin, the whole internet is a network effect. Bitcoin is a network effect early in its days, so that's why it has such potential crazy value. But look up, explore what a network effect really is. And for me personally, I get to construct companies and I get to work with incredible founders. So for me personally, in technology, there's crazy wealth that's being created in technology. Is staggering. Because if you understand how to construct these, and you have people that are working with you on them, you can create that wealth by positively impacting humanity at a really great scale, right?
Right.
That's
your average person isn't doing that. So I mean, maybe your average person spends their life savings on one share of Amazon. So it's still, unfortunately, and I think this is a pattern that has been and will be repeated forever. The little guy is going to get screwed no matter what, right?
Well, I don't know. So what does an entrepreneur do? And this ties into an investment thesis too. What does an entrepreneur do? What did I do to gain my wealth? Right. I had an idea that could help people, and I went all in. And when you do that, when you're concentrating all of your time, all of your everything, all of your resources into one thing. I sold my house into that thing. I everything into that one thing. If you're right, and you do, and that's why capitalism is such a it's
incredible in that regard. Yes.
But it's most people fail, right? And they go to zero. And that competitive environment about competing with the entire world and trying to win a part of the market, and that market, the only way to win is to actually create value for other people, is actually what and it's hard. It changes you. The person started the company I was a totally different person, the learning, the whatever. And so if you're lucky, if you do that job well, and then you concentrate wealth. And it's all in one thing, right? And what does that person do that minute? They diversify.
Yeah, right? Of course.
Because it's too much risk to be able to concentrate. So what that is a derivative of that. Going all into something is concentrating your energy, time, resources, and is high risk, high reward, right? So if somebody wanted to have high risk, high reward, go all in Bitcoin, go all in. I personally wouldn't do that, but I'm in a different spot than
you don't have to.
I don't have to. And so how do you protect
different wealth? Conversation.
How do you protect wealth? Diversify, right? Make sure
that's not how you get it.
that's not how you get it. So so it's really important for your viewers, your people listening to this, to understand that what they're doing, because I don't suspect this is any probability, any possibility from where we are now. But if Bitcoin went to zero, it wouldn't hurt me, right? And so if you were all in, it might hurt you, right? But if you're younger and you want to learn, bigger than all of those things, right?
Age.
But bigger than all of those things, against what created everything for me, and I'm talking my family life, my friends, everything around, and wasn't specifically the entrepreneurial journey. It's what it did to me to understand everything else. It was my curiosity. It was my learning. It was, when I say time is your most valuable asset, it's where are you putting your time into it, hopefully impacting other people's lives. That if you do that really well, you win on all scales, right? Because it forces that learning for you to continually do that. And that learning is the most valuable thing in your life.
I mean, I talk about that all the time. People think I'm corny or that I am harping on a point, but I always say that the only reason to have money is to buy time, not to buy things, right?
So it doesn't. And when you really understand what that looks like, and even more valuable than it's not. The most valuable is when you feel like you make a difference in other people's lives. When you show up, and the most valuable thing, like counting dollars at the end of the day, what is that worth? What is it? It's hollow if you just have, like, what amount of money is enough, right? At some sort of
the endless. I mean, it's the golden handcuffs. You get the $100,000 apartment out of college when you get your investment banking job, but then you want the $500,000 apartment. So you need the job that pays 10 times more. Then you scale up everything. And eventually you're a slave to earning more, no matter how much you have.
You're on a mouse wheel. I used to say this in Young Presidents Organization to other people who couldn't see this and why they were doing this. I said, you say that your value, your family is most important. I said, open your calendar. And their calendar blocked everything business and everything else.
Yeah.
And it's easy to tell us a lie, right? Tell ourselves a lie that we're all doing it for somebody else. But it feels really good in business when everybody says you're great and everything else, to go all there. And then you wonder why your family is breaking, right? And that is breaking because you're not being truthful with yourself on where your time's going. That's the truth. And they know it and you know it. But you don't, you end up getting on this mouse wheel and forgetting those things. So it is about time. It's about time impacting the people that you care about the most.
It's interesting. So many things you've said echo, my own thoughts and sort of the things that I attempt to preach, often less eloquently than you've done it. But like, the one thing we kind of just touched on is age also plays a huge factor because, like you said, if Bitcoin goes to zero, you'll be fine. I mean, if Bitcoin goes to zero, I'll be fine as well. I wouldn't be happy, but my life would go on. But that, if you're all in when you're 70 on something versus all in when you're 20, it's a very different conversation as well, right? So
this ties back to a couple of things we said about before. And so if you're all in on a currency and all your stuff is in one currency denominated and you're 70, that's a huge risk.
Yeah.
It's a huge risk. But people don't know they're all in on one asset class because
they don't understand systematic risk. They don't understand that literally everything they own goes down together. So
exactly. Yeah.
But it hasn't been long. We have examples. I mean, if you were like retiring in 2008 and then you couldn't retire, but also didn't have a job, we've seen this, right? I mean, we've seen people lose everything that they thought they had saved in safe investments for their entire life. And here we are again.
Lebanon today, Venezuela today. This happens all over the world. And people that think that they're safe are now on the street. Right. And that can happen anywhere, and it can happen. By the way, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
It's the cycle.
Yeah, it's a cycle.
So we should buy Bitcoin, save some dollars, and invest in technology.
I would say. I would say.
I think that's a good way to end it. So where can everybody keep up with you after this and follow your journey?
The Twitter is probably best at Jeff Booth. I do these podcasts for the same reason. The book sales, it doesn't matter. The book sales actually I care about because I care about a whole bunch more people understanding what's happening.
It's the impact, not the money, of course.
I don't
right?
make a dollar on the book. I don't need to. So I do these just so hopefully more people are saying the same reason you do them, right? So hopefully more people can understand what's going on, and they can make their own choices into help protecting themselves and their family.
It's hard though. And we all preach it, and I think that we do it, but it's just so hard to change those deeply ingrained feelings and thoughts that people have about money and society and the things that are truly important. I get caught in the trap too. I mean, it's not like I don't buy stuff, but it is really very hard message to deliver. But maybe if people hear it 100 times on different podcasts, eventually they'll start to truly.
What ends up happening is one of these things we've said today will have grabbed somebody, and that person will want to think deeper about this and maybe question some of the things they learned. And take, that's what's happening with the book. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
It's been amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine the feeling of having that level of impact. It's something I think everyone can certainly aspire to. I mean, that's how almost everybody who deeply believes in Bitcoin, we all got there sort of in that way, right? There was some spark. I came because I was a trader and I wanted to make dollars, you know what I mean? But then somewhere along the line, I was like, this is actually important. This makes a difference, And I think that's what happens when you see the value of your portfolio go down like 70 or 80%. You actually start to think about what you're investing in, right?
So what you just said, the amount of people, the number of people in this community, in Bitcoin community, yes, there's some hard edge. There's the one that it's all against other people. But I would say that by and large, the amount of people in this community that really just are unbelievable people. Looking at first principles, it's been I've met some just awesome people through this adventure. It's just been probably, I would say, that writing the book, that's actually been the best outcome. So all of the people that I've met through the adventure and this, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, I say the same thing about the podcast. Is people are like, "Why'd you start a podcast?" I said, "Because Blockworks Group of producers came to me and said, 'Hey, do you want to do a podcast?'" And I was like, "Yeah, why not?" But it wasn't some great thing, but the real benefit of it is that I get to sit for an hour with people like you and learn about something that I'm not a master at. It's like I'm getting paid to get a college education. It's a really incredible thing. So thank you so much for your time. I know we got to go. I really do appreciate it, and I'll be keeping up. And I have to say that you made me think about a lot of things that even, send me deeper down my own rabbit holes, I think. So I really do appreciate that.
That's dope.